we're following breaking new details in the Texas church shooting that took 26 lives, including our first clues about a possible motive. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. Police in Texas revealing new details about gunman Devin Kelley, suggesting the attack stemmed from a domestic situation within his family.
There was a domestic situation going on within this family. The suspect's mother-in-law attended this church. We know that he had made threatening texts from him.
Adam Housley is live in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Adam.
Dana, the inhumane side of man. Evil entered this church more than 24 hours ago, taking with him 26 people so far, including as young as 18 months and as old as 77 years. 20 others were maimed. As one local says, only a handful of people inside this little church here in small town Texas were not shot. This all took place at 11:20 or so yesterday morning here in Texas. The church service had begun. People were inside, about 60 all told. According to the press conference earlier today, which had a couple of bullet points that were a bit surprising and also a bit headline making, the suspect was at a nearby gas station dressed in all black, put on a black mask at some point with a white skull on it, and entered that church opening fire. Take a listen to the FBI.
Without getting into too much detail, the subject, there was some length and time that the subject spent inside that church in a shooting event. He moved around freely inside the church, but I'm not going to get into his exact dynamics within the church.
Moved around freely for some time, opening fire, spraying the church, shooting some people at point-blank range in execution-style manner, we're told. This suspect, 26 years old, served in the Air Force, court-martialed in 2012 for assaulting his wife and child. He was found dead in a neighboring county after he was basically chased down by two Good Samaritans, one who had shot him. He was not a member of this church, but his ex-mother-in-law was, and there had been some texts, we're told, from authorities that were sent to her, some threatening texts, and that played a part in this. They're also not totally discounting the fact that online he had espoused himself as being an atheist as well. That's something, of course, part of this investigation. Dana, there's so much more still to go, but right now it's all about the victims. For example, at University Hospital, there are 3 children fighting for their lives as well as 3 adults.
Adam, I'm curious about something. The last time we had you on the show was during the aftermath of the Las Vegas massacre. Of course, 58 people died in that shooting. There were many more wounded, some still in the hospital. And I'm curious what it is like for you, just 3 weeks later, when you get these calls and you know that you're going to have to go and cover another one of these stories. Like, what is that like for you? Because as consumers of news and anchoring the news show, it's alarming to me, and I'm curious what it's like for you.
Well, trying to find the right word to say without saying something inappropriate. The Vegas one, was kind of, we were there already, so it was more of a breaking news where we just responded not knowing what we found, where this one we kind of knew what we were getting into, but there's no words to describe it. I mean, it makes you want to cry. I mean, I have kids. I don't know how you deal with this, Dana. I can't fathom it. I don't understand it. I don't understand how someone can do something like this. I don't know. I mean, there are no words. I'm really speechless. I mean, this is the second time we've covered something like this in a few weeks, and right. Your heart breaks when you hear about a woman who was 8 months pregnant, she was killed, her unborn child was killed, and 3 of her children were killed. I mean, how does Dad and the other kids go on?
Right. Well, we do think about you, and thank you for bringing us this story, and we'll check back in with you as this develops. Thank you so much, Adam.
All right.
And joining me now is Judge Andrew Napolitano. He's a Fox News senior judicial analyst. I thought it was important to ask him that question, Judge, because it feels like Americans are alarmed by what is happening. It happens so frequently, and yet we sometimes feel a little powerless to do anything about it.
Well, I mean, we all know and love Adam, and he's a very strong guy, but he touched me deeply when he said, I have kids. I just don't know how anybody can deal with this.
And immediately you saw last night that
yes.
There's it's like, can we do more for gun control, or is there just something we can't do because this possibly is a domestic violence situation?
When people are grieving like this, here's where I agree with the president. It is not time to talk about gun control, but we do have to talk about guns in society and guns in Texas, and I know that's what you want to talk about. But in response to what Adam said, and this is a terrible thing to ask, but I have to ask it, is this the new normal? You reminded me that Las Vegas was less than a month ago. We've already forgotten about it.
Right.
Are we going to be seeing these things over and over and over again? At some point, something will have to happen to stop this, because a civilized society cannot tolerate this kind of wanton mass slaughter of innocents.
Right, because society must have order and security in order to
It must
survive.
have life. The highest right is the right to live.
Let's listen to the Texas Public Safety
no.
Director, Freeman Martin. He talked about the shooter not having a license to carry. Listen.
We know during that pursuit, the suspect used his cell phone to notify his father that he had been shot and didn't think he was going to make it. Subsequently, he shot himself. We can confirm that the suspect did not have a license to carry. The suspect did have a non-commissioned, unarmed private security license, similar to a security guard at a concert type situation. There were no disqualifiers entered into the National Crime Information Center database that would preclude him from receiving a private security license.
And so that's where you see some people frustrated that
Right.
if there was a law that would have prevented somebody like him from having a weapon, and yet he got the weapon anyway, is there a loophole that needs to be
All
closed?
right, well, let me tell you about Texas law. Texas law requires no license whatsoever to own or to carry what the law calls a long gun and what we would call a rifle, and it certainly would include the type of weapon that he has, for both semi-automatic. So he had the rough equivalent with him of a military-style M16, one trigger pull per bullet. We're not talking about bump stocks or anything like that
Right.
from Las Vegas. But he did not need a license to own or carry it. So what was the Director of Public Safety talking about? Apparently, he applied for a handgun license, and he did so at the time there was an open charge against him for cruelty to animals. It had not yet been adjudicated, and therefore that prevented him from getting the handgun license. We don't know exactly what happened in the court-martial. He didn't receive a dishonorable discharge. He received a less than honorable, which is somewhere between honorable and dishonorable, and that's not enough under federal law to block you from getting the handgun. But because Texas law, and I'm not critical of it,
Right.
I'm explaining it, because Texas law allows anybody, even a madman, to purchase and carry a rifle, the denial of the permit to purchase and carry a handgun is moot. It doesn't affect his ability to carry the rifle.
There were two men who own lawful weapons.
Right.
That were able to go and help, hopefully, we're going to find out more of how he actually died. But they went after him. They gave chase, and they were able to actually have lawful weapons that might have prevented it from getting worse.
Those two guys are heroes. I just wish that the people in the church, we had Reverend Jeffries on Fox and Friends this morning, who said in his church, people don't check their guns at the door.
Right.
They carry them. Apparently at this church, it was a custom to check the guns at the door.
And we're going to have somebody later on in the show who actually runs an organization that trains volunteers to be able to be at churches to prevent these.
So in a society where we have the Second Amendment, we have the fundamental right to keep and bear arms, what is the solution? The solution, in my view, is more arms to kill the bad guys, because you can kill them before the police get there.
That is certainly something that is being talked about. Judge Napolitano, thank you so much. We
You're
always
welcome.
appreciate learning from you
Pleasure
about
to
the
be
law.
with you.
So officials in Texas say there is a way for you to help the families of the church shooting victims. Listen.
What we do not need at this point are canned goods and non-perishable items for the families. If you want a way to help, it's through prayer and it's through financial donations.
The district attorney naming two places where people can donate. There's a bank account being set up at the Commerce Bank in Stockdale, Texas, and another fund is being set up by Wells Fargo. President Trump has been monitoring the investigation while traveling in Asia. Here's what he had to say in Japan.
Based on preliminary reports, very deranged individual, a lot of problems over a long period of time. We have a lot of mental health problems in our country, as do other countries. But this isn't a guns situation. This is a mental health problem.
Joining us now is Ed Gillespie, the Republican candidate for governor of Virginia. He's going to be here with us now, and then we're going to hold him over for the break and talk a little bit more about the race. If I could get your comments, Ed, in Virginia, you have a big election tomorrow. The gun control, gun rights has been a topic in the campaign, and the NRA gives you an A rating and your opponent, Ralph Northam, an F rating. As you've gone around campaigning all throughout the state, what do you hear from people about gun control?
Well, first of all, Dana, let me say that my fellow Virginians are upset, distraught by what we've seen, the news reports coming out of Texas. We are praying for the victims and their families. And it's stomach-turning and it's heartbreaking. Obviously, in all elections, the Second Amendment is an issue. I am a defender of our Second Amendment rights. I do have the support of the NRA. My opponent is endorsed by Michael Bloomberg and his gun control group. And, we do have a different perspective on that issue. And, voters will take that into account tomorrow here.
In all of the policy plans that I know you put together to run, was mental health a part of that?
Yes, I have a plan for addiction recovery and mental health, and we need to make sure that people who are dealing with mental health challenges in the Commonwealth are getting the care that they need. And it's one of the 21 specific detailed policy proposals I have put forward. I included it as part of my addiction and recovery policy proposal as well, because there is a lot of co-occurrence and overlap clearly between addiction and mental health issues and challenges. And like any other state in the country, we are dealing with an epidemic of opioid and heroin overdose here in Virginia, and we are dealing with strains on our mental health system in the Commonwealth as well, and my plan would help ease those strains.
All right, Ed, stick around because that's down to the wire in Virginia, and we have a brand new Fox News poll showing a very close race. Plus, the people you see here in this photo are trained to keep their churches safe. A man whose mission is securing America's houses of worship joins me to react to the Texas massacre. Coming up. A brand new Fox News poll in Virginia shows the governor's race getting tighter one day before the election. Republican Ed Gillespie is closing the gap. He's now 5 points behind Democrat Ralph Northam within the margin of error in our poll. Last month, they were 7 points apart. The Real Clear Politics average showing an even closer race with Northam just ahead by 3.3%. Ed Gillespie is back with us. You stick around, thankfully. So in 2014, so for full disclosure, of course, Ed and I used to work together. And in that race, I think I was one of the only ones who believed you were going to win. And in fact, you were the underdog and you came very close. But the Democrats didn't even hear your footsteps. So now I'm in a different position. I'm here at the anchor desk, and I have to ask you, how do you feel about being this close of an underdog? And are you concerned that now they're actually paying attention that you are closing in on Ralph Northam?
Oh, they've known they're in a close race for some time now, Dana. They've been throwing the kitchen sink at us, unveiling, awful, vile ads. I'm sure you saw the one that the lieutenant governor stands by still to this day. But that shows the desperation. They know that the momentum is clearly on our side. I can tell you, I've been on the stump all day, and we're meeting with supporters and volunteers and door knockers and phoners. And people are so excited about this race, and they know that first of all, the polls, I think, are much closer than what that showed, but there's no doubt about the direction of the polls, and we have been gaining fast in the course of the past 2 weeks. My opponent's been flip-flopping on very important issues here, like sanctuary cities, which has been an issue in this campaign. And I am talking about a clear message of getting Virginia growing again, to create jobs and raise take-home pay, help people lift themselves out of poverty, and that message is resonating, and we need the change here in Virginia. Our economic growth rate is 0.6%. We're 39th out of 50 states in economic growth, Virginia, and I truly believe we should be #1 in the country, and we can be with the right policies, and I've put forward those policies, and people are responding to that. So
when you mentioned the attack ads against you, certainly we've talked about it here on Fox News and elsewhere, and it got a lot of attention. Let's just take a look at what you had been saying when it comes to sanctuary cities and MS-13 and their response.
Who will keep your family safe? Ralph Northam cast the deciding vote in favor of sanctuary cities that let illegal immigrants who commit crimes back on the street. Ralph Northam, risky policies.
Linking me to MS-13 is despicable. As a pediatric neurologist, I've treated the victims of gun violence. As an Army doctor, I treated victims of terrorism too. And in Richmond, I voted to give gang members tougher prison sentences. I sponsored this ad because for Ed Gillespie to blame me for MS-13 is nothing more than a page from Donald Trump's book.
And then yesterday on the Sunday shows, I was surprised to see Governor McAuliffe say this.
But Ed, he's run the most hateful, divisive, bigoted campaign I've ever seen in Virginia history. Ed's whole campaign, he's taken this campaign in the gutter. It's the most racist campaign we've ever seen in Virginia history. That's not who we are as Virginians.
I mean, Ed, in Virginia history, if you think of somebody like Harry Byrd, who ran on a platform of segregation. It certainly begs the question whether he actually understands Virginia history. And I wonder how you feel about all of these attacks against you, and what were you trying to say in those messages about Ralph Northam's policies on immigration?
Well, let me be clear about one thing, Dana. I know and believe in my heart we are all created in the image and likeness of God and all created equal. And I am fighting actually for the Virginians who live in communities who are most directly affected by violence by MS-13 gang members, and they are the immigrant communities themselves. And so this is a policy debate. My opponent cast a tie-breaking vote against banning sanctuary cities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I believe that if someone is here illegally and they commit a violent crime, our law enforcement authorities at the local level need to cooperate with federal authorities and comply with federal immigration law, and those people should be deported. And my friends in particular Latino community, as one faith leader in Northern Virginia said to me, Hispanic faith leader, he said, you know, the young women, girls really, who are pressed into human trafficking by MS-13, they don't tend to live in your neighborhood or Ralph Northam's. They are in my communities, and they appreciate my stand. MS-13 is a surging threat in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and in Northern Virginia in particular. We've had 8 MS-13 related murders that have been publicly reported since November. And the fact is, we need to crack down on them. I put forward a plan to combat gang violence, including MS-13, including more funding for the Northern Virginia Regional Gang Task Force, for more witness protection for people to be able to come forward and identify gang members in their communities. And yes, to ban sanctuary cities so that if someone is here and illegally in MS-13 they commit a crime, they should be deported. That is a policy difference, and it is the liberals who are conflating MS-13 gang members with the immigrant community that are actually more likely to be their victims, while I'm the one standing up to make their communities safer and all of our communities safer.
So just a last question, a broader political question, because you used to run the RNC. You look across the country. You know what it's like to look nationally across the country as a Republican. You've been focused on the Commonwealth of Virginia, but a lot of people are looking at this race and wondering, can a lifelong Republican like Ed Gillespie figure out a way to run a successful campaign in the age of President Trump, when everyone tries to tie you to the president, and yet you've not even campaigned with him?
Well, the people of Virginia want to talk about jobs and opportunity and schools and traffic congestion and making our communities safer. And I'm responding to what the voters of Virginia want to hear about. And I've put forward 21 specific detailed policy proposals to make life better for all Virginians. And I will be a governor for all Virginians. And so we're a state that's directly affected very much so by federal spending and federal programs. 20 cents of every dollar in our GDP is a direct federal dollar. I'll work with President Trump and Vice President Pence and the cabinet to make sure we're building more ships and submarines in Newport News, and keeping Norfolk the largest naval base in the world, and dredging the channel in the Port of Virginia to be able to take these Panamax container ships in, to get more of our transportation dollars that we send to Washington spent in Virginia as we see fit. And, you know, that in terms of working with the president and the vice president, any governor of Virginia has to be able to work with the President of the United States. That's always been our history, given our proximity. I'll be able to.
As somebody who sometimes drives I-95 through Virginia, I too want to talk about traffic problems in Virginia. All right, Ed Gillespie, thank you so much. We'll be right back. The Texas massacre now part of a growing list of churches hit with gun violence. In September, near Nashville, a man opened fire on worshipers, killing 1 woman and injuring 7 others. In June of 2015, 9 people died when Dylan Roof gunned down African-American church members at a Bible study in Charleston, South Carolina. And in 2008, 2 people died in Knoxville, Tennessee, when a gunman attacked a church service. And the Texas shooting prompting new calls for armed volunteers in churches. Texas passed a law in June waiving state requirements on training, licensing, and background checks for volunteer security services. Let's bring in Chuck Chadwick. He's president of the National Organization of Church Security and Safety Management. We're glad that you could be here today, sir. Why did you decide to start this organization?
Well, about 15 years ago, I was the director of security for a large mega church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And a lot of churches came to us and or came to me, and so you've developed a great model. How can we emulate this? So in 2005, I left full-time church ministry and started the Gatekeepers ministry here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And since then, we've grown our gatekeeper program to where we take volunteers from churches. We train them in a state security program, which is what you would have if you wanted to do security at a professional level. Then we take those volunteers and we license them under the Private Security Act and then deploy them back into the churches. This more or less pushes the liability out from the churches and onto our private security armed guard insurance, and also protects the officers. We've come up with a.
I'm just curious if there is, I'm sure that there are pastors that would prefer never to have to actually deal with violence in their churches, but is it just a reality today, and is it irresponsible not to do something like this?
I've been asked what was the first thing I thought when I heard this yesterday. What I thought was, I sure wish they had had a gatekeeper there. I sure wish they had had somebody who was trained and able to at least mitigate the threat as much as possible. It's like everyone says, it's merely impossible to prevent these things, but at least you can have somebody there, which is what we call an initial responder. We know who the first responders are, the police and the emergency medical services, but too often it's too late when they get there. Most of these things are over in just a matter of 2 or 3 minutes. So we want to put somebody there.
Do you have examples of where people you've trained have prevented violence at a church?
I can't say that they have engaged in any deadly force incidences. We've done this for over 10 years, our initial program, the Gatekeeper program. Done it for over 10 years, have over 350 personal protection, plainclothes personal protection officers in churches all around Texas, and we've never had a deadly force incident. What can I credit that to? Maybe I can credit that to their observation techniques. Maybe I can credit that to their proactive stance. Or maybe I can credit that to the discernment that God has given our guys and
Chuck,
women.
Thank you so much, Chuck Chadwick in Dallas. We appreciate you being on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
More bombshells from the new Dana Brazil book revealing disarray within the DNC right before the 2016 election. What Brazil is now saying about her critics. Plus, we are learning more about the victims in Texas as a tight-knit community tries to cope with the tragedy.
Our church was not comprised of members or parishioners. We were a very close family. We ate together, we laughed together, we cried together, and we worshiped together. Now most of our church family is gone.
We're learning more about the 26 people who lost their lives Sunday morning at a small Texas church. 8 of those who died were from the same family across 3 generations. And one woman, she was 8 months pregnant. Brian Yennis is live at University Hospital in San Antonio. Brian.
Dana, this tragedy has really affected multiple generations of families. And while these families come to grips with losing 26 loved ones, there's still some that are fighting for their lives. At least 15 victims are in area hospitals. Behind me at University Hospital, this is a level 1 trauma center in San Antonio, 45 miles northwest of the First Baptist Church. There are 3 adults here, 3 children. 2 adults were released, and sadly, 1 child has died. There are also 8 victims at the Brooke Army Medical Center that are also there, 6 adults and 2 children. This, as we continue to learn more and more about the victims who've died, like 14-year-old Annabelle Pomeroy. Annabelle's father, Frank, is the First Baptist Church pastor. He and his wife were traveling yesterday and were not at service.
We've had a long night with our children and grandbabies that we have left.
We lost more than Belle yesterday. And one thing that gives me a sliver of encouragement is the fact that Belle was surrounded yesterday by her church family that she loved fiercely. Our sweet Belle would not have been able to deal with losing so much family yesterday.
Then there is the Holcomb family. They lost 8 members of their family, 3 generations. Brian Holcomb, an associate pastor at the church, was killed along with his wife of 40 years, Carla. Brian and Carla had a son, Mark, who died, and Mark's 1-year-old daughter also killed. Their other son, Joe, survived, but his wife, Crystal Holcomb, was killed, and she was pregnant. 3 of Crystal's 5 children are also dead. The Ward family also losing 3 members of their family. Michael Ward was sleeping across the street from the church when his wife woke him up because of the sound of gunfire. Michael lost 3 members of his family, his 5-year-old niece, Brooke Ward, and 7-year-old niece, Emily Garza. We're also now understanding that Ryland Ward, a 5-year-old, Michael's nephew, shot 5 times, is recovering here at University Hospital. Family members are now donating blood. Take a listen from Earl, Ryland's uncle, we just spoke to moments ago.
His mother, grandmother, my sister, they've been in there. We're able to see him, but he's unconscious. They have him highly sedated with all the things that are going on with him. And it's going to be like that for a while.
Dana, just an unimaginable loss for so many families. This hospital will be holding an emergency blood drive until 7 p.m. local time in the lobby. Many, many people showing up to do all they can. Dana?
All right, Brian, that was, you're right, it's unimaginable, and thank you for bringing us that story. Recent polling shows the Virginia governor's race is tightening. This New York Times Upshot Siena College poll shows a razor-thin 3-point difference between Democrat Ralph Northam and Republican Ed Gillespie, and 14% of likely voters were still undecided. Chris Starwelt is Fox News politics editor and the editor of Halftime Report. What does that mean, Chris, when you have an election that's happening tomorrow and you have 14% of voters still undecided?
Well, if I wanted to be uncharitable, it would mean that their poll's not as good as ours. But I won't say that because that would be unkind. No, look, I think our poll has 10% undecided. There's still considerable undecided. This isn't an off-year election. This is an off-year election. Mm-hmm. This is a base electorate. You're talking about the Democratic base versus the Republican base. These are not casual voters. These are high-propensity voters who are motivated on deep partisan lines. This is not about the broad electorate. This is about who's firing up their base.
So we saw a poll today, Washington Post ABC poll, that in 2018, Trump and Clinton voters, 61% of Trump voters plan to vote in 2018 to show support for Trump. 49% of Clinton voters intend to show opposition. What do you think of that? And does that give you any indication about what might happen tomorrow?
Well, the same poll showed that that when you did a rematch between Trump and Clinton, it was even though Donald Trump's approval ratings are horrible, in a head-to-head matchup with Hillary Clinton, they were tied head-to-head 40-40. Right. So that tells Democrats ought to be less confident than they are right now, because you got to beat somebody, you got to have somebody, and right now they have a problem as a party about determining what kind of face they want to put forward. And in Virginia, since Gillespie has run what Steve Bannon called Trumpism without Trump, he's run identity politics, very divisive campaign, and used that to stoke the enmity within the Republican base in Virginia and fire up those voters, whereas Ralph Northam hasn't been able to connect with the Democratic base in the same kind of way. That's how somebody like Gillespie can use Trump tactics to win in a race like this, and it ought to be instructive for Democrats who don't know how to do it right now.
So then did Northam miss the moment or misread the electorate?
I think it's a difficult spot for him because of the composition of his party. Liberal Democrats make a lot of demands. They want their own identity politics played. They want those things, and then they don't, in recompense, give their nominees the chance to move to the middle and make the appeal in the suburbs. Look, I think Northam is still the heavy favorite, the favorite at least, maybe the heavy favorite in this race. But the reason this has gotten closer, the reason it's gotten harder, is that Gillespie's been able to act like Trump and Northam's been stuck acting like Clinton.
Let's talk about the Democrats writ large. This is Dana Brazile yesterday talking about her new book coming out. It's called Hack. She's going to be on the show tomorrow. She was talking to George Stephanopoulos over the weekend. Let's take a listen.
George, this was worse than Hurricane Katrina in terms of the emotional toll. But do I regret standing up for what's right? Helping Hillary Clinton, helping the Democratic Party. Do I regret any of that? No, I wish I could have done more, George. For those who are telling me to shut up, they told Hillary that a couple of months ago. You know what I tell them? Go to hell. I'm going to tell my story.
So she's not stopping. Is her book and the revelations in it a chance for the Democrats to finally say, okay, we got to figure out a way to get 2016 put behind us?
Right. And also, what do you do about Team Bernie? What do you do about these voters? This book, in a lot of ways, is an apology from Brazil to Team Bernie and his supporters to say, look, I'm sorry that this happened, and I wish I could have done better. I wish I could have done more. My hands were tied, but now I can tell you the whole sad story. But the problem for Democrats, as they head into 2020, they still haven't figured out how to deal with this same energy. This is Northam's problem. This is the problem for Democrats. They have an unyielding base that they don't know how to placate in order to give themselves enough latitude to move on and talk about the broader electorate. Or otherwise, if they can't reach out to the voters who are skeptical of them, they're going to leave those voters absolutely susceptible to Republican identity politics and the culture war.
All right, well, we're going to ask her more about that tomorrow. Chris Starwelt, thanks. And be sure to check out our weekly podcast, Perino and Starwelt. I'll tell you what, it's always available for download on iTunes or wherever you listen, and airs on Sirius Channel 450 on Sundays at 8 a.m. Senator McCain now dealing with another health issue as he continues his battle with brain cancer. Still ahead, why he was admitted to a hospital over the weekend. And he's not the only lawmaker recovering. Senator Rand Paul joining a growing list of politicians assaulted this year. An update on his condition next.
Fox News Deck, much more ahead on the tragedy in Texas. We'll talk with a local pastor who sat with family members as they waited for word on their loved ones. And later, an update on President Trump's Asia trip. Today, he said he has no more patience for North Korea and talked about giving Japan more firepower to shoot down missiles. Busy news day. Top of the hour, and Shepard Smith reporting. We'll see you then.
Over the weekend, Senator John McCain was admitted to Walter Reed Medical Center for a minor tear in his Achilles tendon. He was also treated for some side effects from his cancer therapy. But the senator is now back at work wearing a protective cast and complaining that it's cramping his style. He tweeted, "I can't tell you how much I hate wearing this boot." We can sympathize with him. Senator Rand Paul is recovering after he was attacked outside his home in Kentucky. The senator's spokesman, who first said he suffered only minor injuries, is now saying, quote, he has 5 rib fractures, including 3 displaced fractures. This type of injury is caused by high-velocity severe force. It is not clear exactly how soon he will return to work, as the pain is considerable, as is the difficulty in getting around, including flying. The attorney for the neighbor who was arrested for the assault just issued a statement saying, in part, quote, the unfortunate occurrence of November 3rd has absolutely nothing to do with either's politics or political agendas. It was a very regrettable dispute between 2 neighbors over a matter that most people would regard as trivial. Brian Kilmeade is the co-host of Fox and Friends. So the mystery sort of deepens here. Obviously, it is horrible when anybody gets attacked. The injuries are really serious. He can't even fly back to Washington in order to do votes. What do you think happened here?
Well, for one thing, I'll just say this. I know if you break 1 rib, it's extremely painful. It hurts to take a breath. 5 are unbelievable. The fact that his lung is actually bruised, it shows you. These guys are both in their, one's in his late 40s, 50s. The other guy who hit him was also a doctor at 59 years old. I mean, I just watched UFC fights, 5 UFC fights, people kicking each other who are a lethal weapon. Jimmy behind the crane camera also could do some damage. And I don't see these type of injuries. This was a serious hit. And all I could say is this. I don't know what the dispute is, although the neighbor is a doctor and considered a very fervent Democrat. But if you add this with Steve Scalise and some of the screaming and some of the anger that we've seen in and around politics today, the fact that you can't say who you voted for to friends and neighbors and have to change the subject, I think this is all of a sudden. I just talked to a senator before I came on. I said, do you have security? And he says, no. I go, do you have it when you get home? He goes, no, we don't. I go, you worry about it more. They go, we can't worry about it more. We talk about it with each other, but we can't worry about it more.
Well, actually, that's interesting because Marsha Blackburn told me that she's actually made a proposal to the Federal Election Commission that would allow members of Congress to use campaign funds that they raised for personal security if they feel they need it at home. Now, Senator Paul was at home mowing his own lawn when this happened. So I don't know if you need to have security all the time, but it does raise the question about what we're going to do to protect people who are serving the country.
Right. We also got to get somebody to mow Rand Paul's lawn. I mean, I had no idea.
Are you volunteering?
I am volunteering to mow his lawn, especially the edging, which I think is relatively artistic by nature. But Clearly, he was blindsided, number one. Number two, if he was actually blowing his loan, did he land on it or land on top of it? And number three is he is somebody who's very polarizing. Even Republicans get mad at him. You know, Trump
I
gets
know,
mad
but
at
basically,
Democrats.
if you say hi, that is considered polarizing anymore. I mean, you were just saying that you witnessed people, yelling at each other this weekend.
This weekend, I was in Columbus, Ohio, and talking about NFL kneelers. I have two Marines yelling at each other about different takes on the same subject. I'm looking at their faces. They probably haven't been that mad since grade school.
Right.
And I'm saying that's how people are on the edge right now on everything. And especially when you see what happened in Texas. You might say, I've never been to Texas. I've certainly never been to a town of 400. But you take it in because you watch our channel, you watch other channels, you read the newspaper, and you internalize this.
So were you in Columbus to talk about your book?
Yeah. And
Can we show it here?
Ohio.
We have it is about Andrew Jackson, the inside.
The Miracle
of New Orleans.
And you talk about polarizing and Donald Trump. They have a lot of similarities between them. You have somebody who was definitely running against the establishment, as was Donald Trump, not accepted by Washington. Neither was Donald Trump, arguably still not accepted by Washington, and was not liked by his predecessors, as we saw over the weekend. Either is Donald Trump. The founding fathers had a problem with Jackson. Jackson had a problem with them. There's a lot of similarities in this day, but this is about a battle that America won.
And so what do you tell people about what you learned from the research that you did for this book that could be applied to today's politics?
This is what I say, and this is what bothered me so much about the kneeling and the foundation of football. We can agree that we love the country. We can agree we want to get in different directions. The Battle of New Orleans was about the country rallying together when the White House was burned to the ground.
Yep.
Some weren't for the war, some were. But when they burned the White House to the ground, we rallied and stopped them cold in New Orleans. That's what we got to get back to. Then you can worry about Democrat or Republican. We got to get back to our roots and being pro-American.
Well,
and that's why I think people care.
Well, we certainly do have a common enemy, right? The fight against radical Islamic terrorism is one that should be able to bring us all together.
And maybe Russian infiltration is a problem. You know, maybe that we're not happy what's going on in the Middle East right now. I thought we could go on a lot of things. I thought it used to be the nuances in taxes we used to argue over. That's when you were at the White House. Those were the good old days.
Well, look, we were at war at the time, and we can't call those the good old days.
But we did have 73, we had 73 senators vote for the war, so people were invested in the war.
Brian Kilmeade, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
About all those things. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and his associate Rick Gates, they're appearing in federal court today, and we're going to tell you what the judge ruled.